I'm sitting in a pub in Manchester right now, 79 years old, buying rounds for anyone who listened to the most insane story from World War II that somehow never made it into the history books. My name is James Jimmy Crawford, and on the night of April 3rd, 1945, I got absolutely pissed on German schnapps, stole a Nazi Panzer IV tank from right under the Wehrmacht's nose, drove it through 3 villages while firing the cannon at random buildings, and somehow became a war hero instead of getting court-martialed. This is the true story of the drunken tank heist that changed the course of a battle and earned me a medal I probably didn't deserve. Comment below right now if you've ever done something stupid that somehow worked out perfectly, because what I did that night should have gotten me killed or imprisoned, but instead it saved my entire battalion. Let me take you back to April 2nd, 1945. The war was nearly over, everyone knew it, but the Nazis were fighting tooth and nail for every inch of German soil. I was a 21-year-old private in the British 7th Armored Division, the Desert Rats we called ourselves. We'd fought our way from North Africa through Italy and France, and now we were pushing into Germany itself, exhausted, traumatized, and desperate for the whole bloody thing to be over. My unit had been pinned down for 3 days outside a small German town called Lüneburg, about 50 kilometers south of Hamburg. The Germans had dug in with heavy artillery and at least 2 Panzer tanks that were absolutely massacring any attempt we made to advance. We'd lost 18 men in 2 days trying to take that position. Morale was in the toilet. We were tired, we were angry, and we were running low on everything: ammunition, food, hope. That evening, our commanding officer, Major Harrison, called off the assault until we could get reinforcements and air support. We were camped in a bombed-out farmhouse about 2 kilometers from the German line, and the standing order was to stay put, stay quiet, and wait for orders. But here's the thing about soldiers who've been fighting for 4 years straight: sometimes the rules stop making sense. Around 2100 hours, my mate, Tommy Briggs, came back from a reconnaissance patrol with the most beautiful sight I'd seen in months: 2 bottles of German schnapps he'd liberated from an abandoned house. "Crawford," he said with a grin that showed his missing front tooth, "I think we deserve a drink, don't you?" Now, drinking on duty was absolutely forbidden, especially this close to enemy lines, but Tommy and I had been through hell together since El Alamein, and we figured if we were going to die tomorrow trying to take that German position, we might as well have one last proper drink. 1 drink became 2. 2 became 4. By 2300 hours, we'd finished both bottles between us, and I was more drunk than I'd been since before the war. The kind of drunk where everything seems not just possible, but like a brilliant idea. Tommy had passed out in the corner, snoring like a chainsaw, and I was sitting there looking at a map we'd captured from a German patrol, showing their defensive positions. Hit that subscribe button if you can already tell this is going to go badly. Drop a like if you've ever had liquid courage turn into liquid stupidity. That's when I had what my drunk brain thought was a stroke of genius. Looking at that map, I could see the German positions, including where they'd parked their Panzer tanks for the night. They were about 800 meters behind the main German line in what they thought was a secure area. And I thought, completely seriously in my schnapps-soaked mind, what if I just went and took one of those tanks? Now, sober Jimmy would have recognized this as the stupidest idea in military history, but drunk Jimmy thought it was brilliant. The Germans wouldn't expect anyone to be insane enough to sneak behind their lines and steal a tank. It was so crazy it might actually work. And if I could steal one of those Panzers, our boys could use it to break through the German position tomorrow. I need you to understand how drunk I was. I genuinely believed this was a good plan. I gathered up my rifle, my sidearm, a few grenades, and started stumbling toward the German lines at around midnight. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, partly because I knew they'd stop me, partly because I could barely form coherent sentences. The walk to the German line took about 45 minutes, and I sobered up exactly 0%. If anything, the cold night air just made me sleepy and more determined to prove my brilliant plan would work. I crawled through a drainage ditch that ran along the road, praying I wouldn't bump into any German patrols. My luck held. The Germans were confident in their position and weren't expecting any Allied soldiers to be stupid enough to venture out at night. I reached the German rear area around 1:15 hours, April 3rd, 1945, and there they were, illuminated by a few scattered torches and a quarter moon, 2 Panzer IV tanks just sitting there like Christmas presents. There were a few German soldiers around, but most seemed to be sleeping or standing watch facing towards our lines, not towards their own rear. This is where drunk logic really took over. I figured if I could take out the guards quietly and quickly, I could get into one of the tanks before anyone realized what was happening. So I did something incredibly stupid. I pulled the pin on one of my grenades and threw it at a supply truck about 50 meters away from the tanks. Comment terrible plan if you already know this is going to go sideways, because it absolutely did. The explosion woke up every German within a kilometer. Soldiers started pouring out of tents and buildings, shouting in German, trying to figure out what was happening. But here's the thing. In the chaos and darkness, they thought they were under artillery attack from the main Allied line. They started running towards their defensive positions, grabbing weapons, preparing for an assault they thought was coming. And in all that chaos, one very drunk British private stumbled towards one of the Panzer tanks that now had exactly 0 guards around it because everyone had run to battle stations. I climbed onto the tank, and thank God I'd done tank training back in England, even though I'd never expected to use it, and found the hatch was unlocked. German overconfidence. They'd never imagined someone would try to steal a tank from their own rear. I dropped into the tank and immediately realized I had no idea how to operate a German Panzer. The controls were labeled in German, which I couldn't read, and the layout was completely different from the British tanks I'd trained on. But I was committed now. I could hear German voices getting closer, shouting about checking the tanks. I started flipping switches and pressing buttons, praying something would happen. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared into life. The Germans outside definitely heard that. I heard shouting, then someone climbing onto the tank. I panicked, grabbed the only weapon I could reach, the tank's main gun controls, and fired.
The 75mm cannon fired with a deafening boom inside the enclosed space, the recoil nearly knocking me off the seat. I had absolutely no idea what I'd hit, but I heard screaming outside, and more importantly, whoever had been climbing onto the tank wasn't climbing anymore. I found what I hoped was the throttle, jammed it forward, and the Panzer lurched ahead, nearly throwing me into the instrument panel. Like this video right now if your heart is racing. Comment where you're watching from, because this story gets so much worse before it gets better. I had stolen a Nazi tank, drunk, at 2 a.m., and I had no idea how to drive it properly. The Panzer crashed through a wooden fence, narrowly missed a building, and headed in what I desperately hoped was the direction of Allied lines. Behind me, I could hear German soldiers shouting and shooting, but small arms fire wasn't going to stop a Panzer. The problem was, I didn't know how to steer properly. The tank veered left, then right, smashing through everything in its path. I sideswiped a house, knocked over a stone wall, and drove straight through someone's garden. And because I was still drunk and panicking, I kept accidentally firing the main gun. Boom, there goes a barn. Boom, there goes a church steeple. Boom, I have no idea what that was, but it exploded impressively. I crashed through the German defensive line, doing about 30 kilometers per hour in a stolen Panzer, firing randomly, and the Germans scattered in absolute confusion. They thought they were being attacked by an entire Allied tank column. Some of them started retreating. Others started firing at me, but their anti-tank weapons were all pointed the wrong direction, toward our lines, not toward their own rear. I was now somewhere between the German lines and the Allied lines, in a stolen Nazi tank, still drunk, absolutely lost, and firing the cannon every time I panicked, which was constantly. The Panzer smashed through another fence, and suddenly I was in the middle of a small village. It must have been around 2:30 hours by then. Lights were coming on in houses as terrified civilians realized there was a tank driving through their town. This is where things got truly insane. As I careened through the village, I saw German soldiers running toward the sound of my tank. They thought I was a German tank responding to an attack. One officer actually tried to flag me down to give me orders. I panicked, swerved to avoid him, crashed through a butcher shop, and accidentally fired the cannon again, blowing up a fountain in the village square. The Germans finally realized I wasn't one of theirs when I crashed into their fuel depot on the edge of town and set it ablaze. The explosion lit up the entire night sky, and that's when the Allied forces saw me. My own battalion, seeing a massive explosion and a German Panzer firing randomly, thought the Germans were launching a counterattack. They started firing everything they had, artillery, mortars, machine guns, in the general direction of the chaos I was creating. So now I was being shot at by both sides, still drunk, still lost, driving a stolen German tank through a village at 3 a.m. while everything around me exploded. I tried to turn the tank around to head back toward friendly lines, but I overcorrected and drove straight into a river. Subscribe if you think I'm dead at this point. Comment, how did he survive? Because honestly, I still don't know. The Panzer crashed down an embankment and plunged into a river that was, thank God, only about 4 feet deep. The engine died immediately. Water started pouring into the tank through vents and hatches I'd left open. I was trapped in a flooding German tank in a river in the middle of a battle that I had accidentally started. I kicked open the top hatch and crawled out, gasping for air. The village behind me was in flames from the fuel depot explosion. Tracer rounds were flying everywhere, explosions were going off constantly, and I was standing on top of a half-submerged Panzer in a river, watching the chaos I had created, still drunk enough that it all seemed like a very strange dream. That's when I heard British voices. A patrol from my battalion had been sent to investigate the explosion, and they found me, Private James Crawford, soaking wet, reeking of schnapps, standing on a captured German tank in a river while behind me half the German defensive position burned. Crawford? Sergeant Miller stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What in the actual hell are you doing? I stole a tank, Sergeant, I said, and then I finally sobered up enough to realize the magnitude of what I'd done. I think I might have started a battle. I had indeed started a battle. The chaos I had created, the stolen tank, the explosions, and the fire had convinced the Germans they were under a major night attack. They'd pulled forces from their defensive positions to respond, leaving gaps in their line. And when my battalion saw the confusion and the fires, Major Harrison had ordered an immediate assault, thinking our reinforcements had arrived early. By the time the sun came up on April 3, 1945, the British 7th Armored Division had broken through the German defensive position that had held us up for 3 days. We captured Lüneburg with minimal casualties compared to what we'd been taking. The Germans were disorganized, demoralized, and convinced they'd been hit by a sophisticated, multi-pronged night attack. And it had all been caused by one drunk private stealing a tank. I spent the next 3 days expecting to be court-martialed. Instead, Major Harrison called me into his tent. "Crawford," he said, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, "you were either the luckiest bastard in the British Army or the bravest soldier I've ever commanded. I haven't decided which." "Sir, I'm sorry, sir," I stammered. "I was drunk and I thought—" "I know exactly what you thought, because I read the after-action reports from the German prisoners we took. They think we sent a commando team to steal their tank and create chaos. They think it was a brilliant tactical operation, so that's exactly what it's going to be in our report." Comment legend if you think he deserved that medal. Comment lucky idiot if you think he should have been court-martialed, because honestly, both are true. I was put in for a commendation for extraordinary initiative and bravery in conducting a solo night raid behind enemy lines. 3 weeks later, after the war ended, I received a military medal for gallantry. At the ceremony, a general shook my hand and told me I was an example of British courage and ingenuity. If only he'd known I'd been blackout drunk and had no idea what I was doing. Tommy Briggs, my drinking buddy who'd passed out and missed the whole thing, never let me forget that I'd gone on the war's most insane joyride without him. "You stole a Nazi tank and didn't even invite me," he'd complain for years afterward. "Some friend you are." The truth is, I got phenomenally lucky. Everything that could have gone wrong and should have gone wrong somehow worked out. The grenade I threw could have hit me with shrapnel. The Germans could have caught me climbing into the tank. I could have driven into a minefield. I could have been shot by my own side. The tank could have been hit by artillery. I could have drowned in that river. But instead, through sheer drunken luck, I accidentally executed what military historians later called a textbook example of psychological warfare and tactical disruption. There are university courses where they study the Battle of Lüneburg as an example of unconventional night tactics.
They have no idea it was just one drunk idiot who couldn't read German trying to steal a tank. I never told the full truth to anyone outside my immediate unit. My grandchildren think I'm a war hero who planned a brilliant commando raid. The local newspaper did a story about me for VE Day last year, calling me a tactical genius. My wife of 53 years thinks I was part of a special operations team. Only Tommy, Major Harrison, Sergeant Miller, and a few others who were there that night know the truth, that I was completely pissed and thought stealing a tank seemed like a good idea at the time. Drop a like if you think some of the best stories come from the worst decisions. Share this with anyone who's ever done something stupid that somehow worked out. What I learned that night is that warfare, like life, is chaos. The difference between a hero and an idiot is sometimes just luck and timing. The carefully planned operations, the brilliant strategies, the tactical genius, sometimes all of that matters less than one drunk private who stumbles into starting a battle. After the war, I went back to Manchester, worked as a bus driver for 40 years, had 3 kids, 6 grandchildren, and lived a perfectly normal life. But once a year, on April 3rd, I buy around at my local pub and tell this story to anyone who listen. Most people think I'm exaggerating. They think there's no way someone could actually steal an enemy tank while drunk and accidentally win a battle. But Tommy backs me up every time, and we've got the after-action reports, the medal, and the scars to prove it. Well, I've got scars. Tommy's got nothing except regret that he passed out too early and missed the greatest night of stupidity in military history. I'm 79 years old now. Most of my old unit is gone. Major Harrison passed in 1998. Tommy died last year, and I miss him every day. The story of what really happened that night died with most of the men who witnessed it. But I'm still here, and I'm telling it now because I think it's important. Everyone thinks war is about bravery and planning and tactics, and it is most of the time. But sometimes war is about a drunk private who steals a tank at 2 a.m. because it seemed like a good idea after too much schnapps. Sometimes the heroes are just people who got lucky. Sometimes the difference between a war crime and a medal is which side you're on and whether anyone important finds out what actually happened. I don't recommend anyone try to recreate my tactical genius. Don't drink on duty, don't steal enemy vehicles, don't start battles without orders. But if you do somehow end up in a stolen Nazi Panzer at 3 a.m. with no idea how you got there, remember to aim before you shoot, steer away from rivers, and hope to God your commanding officer has a sense of humor. This is James Tommy Crawford, former private in the 7th Armored Division, recipient of the Military Medal, and the drunkest tank thief in World War II history. The official record says I was a hero. The truth is, I was an idiot who got lucky. But you know what? I'll take it. Comment your craziest "I can't believe that worked" story below. Subscribe for more untold war stories. Share this with anyone who thinks all heroes are brave. Sometimes they're just drunk and lucky. And remember, some of history's greatest moments were complete accidents by people who had no idea what they were doing. The tank I stole is still in that river, by the way. Last I heard, it's considered a historical site now. They think it was abandoned during the German retreat. Only I know it was abandoned because a drunk British private drove it into a river and then ran away. Cheers to bad decisions that somehow become good stories. And cheers to Tommy Briggs, who gave me that schnapps and accidentally created a war hero. Miss you, mate.